I've been doing this series upside, downside of kind of talking about, every team, not every team, but notable teams, kind of what could happen, what could go right, also what could go wrong. This series is kind of meant for the Saints in a way, because I do think this is a team with a very high ceiling and also a low floor. I think there's a lot of players on this team that I look at and say, yeah, that could be great, or it could not be. Like, that's a common thing I see in a lot of these position groups. So let's start off with the most important position, quarterback, which Derek Carr. Listen, what's the upside of Derek Carr? He was an MVP candidate. I don't know if we're going to expect him to be that, and even that, I don't know if he looked like Patrick Mahomes that season. But the upside for Derek Carr is a top 10 quarterback. He has shown that, and he has shown that relatively consistently up until last season, where he had his worst year. I mean, he just did. It was a tough year, and really it was a tough few games in an otherwise normal year for him. So maybe because of that, it's less reason to panic. I think he'll probably just be like a solid tier 3 quarterback for the tier 3 fringe tier 2 quarterback for the Saints, which is kind of what he's been for his whole career, of like maybe that, is he quite Matt Stafford, maybe a little bit below Matt Stafford, kind of where he's been for his whole career, and a guy who does great, with 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Now, but again, that's a prediction. The downside is that maybe he has fallen off a little bit. Listen, I get it. Derek Carr isn't 45, so we assume he still has plenty of years left in him. It does happen that a guy at 32 starts to, his play starts to regress. Like, that isn't something that's crazy to think happens, right? That is something that happens here and there. So maybe that's what's happened, or maybe the game has just sort of passed him by a little bit, like kind of what happened with Andy Dalton. There were just more good quarterbacks entering the league, so even if you're saying the same, your value has gone down. That could be another possibility. So that's the downside. The upside is he could, at least be a top 10 quarterback, a realistic upside. Because I'm not just thinking, what can I envision, but like, what is the realistic upside and downside? For running backs also, like Alvin Kamara, talk about upside, downside. Literally, the upside of this running back room with him and Jamal Williams is the best running back room in football. The downside is that Kamara, isn't, able to stay on the field, and, isn't able to stay healthy, or it just isn't as effective anymore after all those injuries. And maybe Jamal Williams is, more suited to be in a backup role. And this is a bottom tier running back room. That's the upside downside there, massively upside downside. And I think for the wide receiving room, I feel pretty similar. Like, Chris Olave, I think, is good. I think he's good. Let's move on. Michael Thomas completely changed the dynamic of this team. Even if he hits, I still think there's a bit of a depth issue. I don't know how much I trust Rashid Shaheed or Jawan Johnson here, but, still, there is some, if Michael Thomas hits, though, that 1-2 combo of him and Olave should still be good enough that you can find a third option somewhere, and we're talking about a really good wide receiving room. So again, the Michael Thomas thing, it's just a question. The offensive line, I have some questions about. I mean, what are we getting out of Trevor Penning? He's a complete wild card to me. And honestly, there's several wild cards on this offensive line. Eric McCoy, who had a great rookie year and hasn't really shown that since, in my opinion. Cesar Ruiz, another guy who was a first-round pick who hasn't lived up to the hype. Anders Pete, he's always inconsistent. Ryan Ramchek's awesome, but a lot of question marks. So again, the upside is Penning hits, the interior takes a step forward, and this is one of the best offensive lines in football. I can envision that. I can also envision it being an actively bad offensive line. That's how different it could be. As for the defense was weird last year, because, I talked about Dennis Allen and Todd Bowles, two guys who I think you can make a big comparison with, because they both defensive coordinators that replaced the head coach once the head coach left. Both had retired, although Sean Payton obviously back into the league now. But one of kind of the differences I said about them was I thought Todd Bowles at least coached up his defense a lot better than I thought that we saw in New Orleans. Not to say it was terrible. 10th best points per drive defense, and given some injuries, it's understandable, but it still wasn't as dominant as we saw in years past, where it was, debatably the best defense in football just 2 years ago. Could they return to that form? Again, talk about inconsistency. Lattimore is kind of the model of inconsistency in a sense. When he's at his best, he is the best corner in football. Like, legitimately, if he's on, he can lock down, the best receivers in the league. Just ask Mike Evans. But when he's not on, it can be tough. I mean, he can get beat. It is what it is. I also don't love some of the depth here. Is Paulson Adebo going to take that next step? They kind of need him to at the corner position. Bradley Roby, always inconsistent. Safeties are good. Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May, you trust those guys to be good. But if someone can step up and we get one of those good Lattimore seasons, this could be another elite secondary. But if it doesn't, teams can't really succeed with bad secondaries in the NFL. So you got good linebackers. Demario Davis is awesome. A little old. That's kind of maybe the only concern there. But again, I don't think this is going to be the year he falls off. He's one of the best linebackers in the league, one of the best players in the league. Pete Warner also very good at the off-ball linebacker position. Looking at the defensive line, it feels like for this to have an upside, you need Brian Bresee, the rookie who they just drafted, to come in and show some things right away. And you need a better season from Cam Jordan than they got last year. Cam Jordan wasn't great last year. I didn't think he was great. I didn't think he was a disaster, but he wasn't typical awesome Cameron Jordan that we're used to seeing. They've now gone out and paid him some money to keep him on the roster, which I just don't know what he's. I think even it's probably still not a bad contract if he plays like how he did last year, but he's not necessarily lighting the world on fire, which is kind of what you would need him to be to make up for it. Again, Carl Granderson's fine. Interested in seeing what Isaiah Foxey is going to do. Nathan Shepard's fine. There's players here. I'm just saying the overall, who's going to be the guy who's winning one-on-ones consistently. If it's not Cameron Jordan, I don't think I trust any of them to just consistently win one-on-ones. So that's the upside downside. The downside is Cameron Jordan, as an older player, continues to regress. The upside is last year was just a bad year. He's back to being an elite player. Now you have an elite edge rusher. The rest of the defensive line can then just do their role, which they should be able to do effectively. You have good linebackers, and if Paulson Adebo steps up, now you got a great defense, maybe a top 5 defense, and if this is a top 5 defense and a top 10 offense, that's great upside. That's an 11 or 12 win team, which I can definitely realistically see happening. The downside, though, is that this stuff doesn't happen. Cameron Jordan continues to regress. The secondary depth proves to be an issue, and we still only see a game or two out of Michael Thomas before he gets injured. Offensive line's tough. Derek Carr now has some struggles there because of that, and and Alvin Kamara doesn't come back. I mean, there's a lot of just question marks with this team, but a question mark isn't the end of the world. The end of the world is when you look at a roster and say, okay, that's bad. There's no second corner. You're going to be a disaster. There is a second corner. It's Paulson Adebo. What's he going to do? I don't know, but there is at least a potential answer there. So I'm not as pessimistic about the Saints as I would be for some other teams, but I'm also not as optimistic because I think there's more things that can go wrong for this team, which is why they have such a high upside and such a low downside to this team. So very fascinating team. But yeah, what do you think about the Saints? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.